The Canada 360 Economic Summit was an incredible event. We were sold out in terms of capacity. The quality of speakers was outstanding. The participants and the audience were first rate. I'm really grateful to all of the members of the board who attended and who, right from Phil on down, just tremendous contributions. And I think everybody came away, sponsors, delegates, speakers, saying this was time very well spent. I think there were a number of key takeaways. The first was how rapidly things are changing, that we have to watch changes both domestically and geopolitically. And this was a theme that kept on coming up, whether in Ian Bremmer's comments or elsewhere, that events around the world are changing rapidly, and we have to be able to adapt in Canada. There was certainly a consensus that change is the new normal and that business has to adjust to that we have to improve the dialogue with government about issues that are important to us, that if we're looking at international trade, that we need to focus not simply on signing new deals, but how do we make the deals work? The deals open the doors for business, but we've got to get business through the door. We heard about the changes in the very nature of the economy itself, about the digital economy and the impacts that it has and the need for business to adjust there as well. So dramatic change, better dialogue, the fact that we need to be able to be more connected and have more of an impact, and to focus government as well on the importance of competitiveness in Canada and ensuring that Canadian business can succeed in the midst of all of this change.
You weren't aware of, given his remarks.
Ian Bremmer was an astonishing presenter. I think the discussion with him could have gone on for another hour or two, and people would have been still riveted sitting in their seats. He was very direct in terms of what he was saying to us. For example, he focused a great deal on the speed of change and on the fact that geopolitical events will affect Canada. We're not an island. We're affected by what goes on in the rest of the world. And he made great point of the fact that we are seeing this incredible division globally between the United States and China. And he brought that home to Canada on the issue of 5G, where he pointed out that we could be seeing the development of two standards of telephony, one that's Chinese, the other that's American, and that Canada has to choose one or the other. The argument that he made was that it would be disastrous for Canada if we were to isolate ourselves from the American system, given how closely integrated we are with the United States. It was interesting because the next week I was in Washington for the G7, or for the B7 rather, and when we met with U.S. government officials, I raised that question with them. Did they see the development of two completely different standards of telephony? The answer was no, but of course their pitch as well was that we had to be very restrictive in terms of allowing Huawei to participate in the Canadian system. It meant that the material that I got out of Canada 360 was directly relevant to the discussions that we were having. And Ian Bremmer was fascinating in terms of his ability to answer any of the incredible range of questions that were put to him by members of the audience. What it really brought home more than anything else was the pace of change, and also how interconnected we are with the rest of the world. The Canadian Chamber appeared before the Parliamentary Committee last week to discuss CUSMA, and took the position very strongly that this was very much in Canada's interests and that Parliament should pass the agreement without delay. And this certainly makes sense. We've lived with incredible uncertainty. This was the point of Ian Bremmer's address to us, that there's so much uncertainty out there. We need to find greater certainty. In the case of North America, the Canada-US-Mexico agreement gives greater certainty to the business communities in all three countries. It isn't what we would have liked to have seen. We would have liked to have seen something that is more ambitious than that. But it's infinitely better than what the alternative would have been, which would have been a trade war between the United States and its other North American partners. And what it will do is it will take down the level of uncertainty that Canadian business has to face today. The government has indicated that its priority for this budget is this climate emergency, as they refer to it. And we certainly went out of our way in our presentations to the government to make it clear that business is a leader in terms of dealing with climate change in Canada, in terms of trying to set better standards and to respect the environment. But we're also trying to impress on the government that there are other urgent issues that need to be addressed as well. The events of the last several days make that very clear. When we take a look at the blockades, which severely damaged the Canadian economy, costing at least hundreds of millions of dollars and possibly billions. When we look at the decision by tech that they decided that our regulatory system was so badly broken that it was impossible for them to be able to move ahead. And when we look at the possibility of the coronavirus coming to Canada, the most recent evidence is that the genie has escaped the bottle and that this may very well evolve into a pandemic. This means then that the Canadian economy, which had experienced slow growth in the final quarter of 2019, is facing a whole series of issues that are going to make it more difficult for business this year. This certainly includes the impact on Canada's brand, on our international reputation as a good place to do business and a reliable supplier and a good place to invest. We are going to have to, after the tech decision and after the damage that was done by the blockades, we're going to have to look at how we rebuild that brand and attract investment, both domestic and foreign, to this country. So our argument to the politicians as they prepare for the budget is, yes, by all means, let's look at what we do about climate, but there are many other issues that urgently need to be addressed. And the issue of Canadian competitiveness and how we can make the system more business-friendly is key among them. Over the course of the last several months, we've been having meetings of the heads of various organizations, myself, the Canadian Council on Aboriginal Business, the Business Council of Canada, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And what we've been doing is comparing notes, looking for what sort of information do we have, what are we hearing from our members, where do we see opportunities with government, and how can we work together more effectively on behalf of our members. So after the election, we came together to look at the budget and look at what the economic priorities of the government would be. And we were asking ourselves, in this minority parliament, where are there areas where there's the prospect for making some progress? And we identified three of them. One of them was infrastructure, both digital and physical. And we asked ourselves, how can we work together to impress on the government the need to get in place infrastructure that will enable business to be more successful? And we think that that's not a partisan issue. It's something where even in this parliament we can move ahead. Skills is another example. To compete in the 21st century economy, you have to have a 21st century workforce. And that means issues like immigration, it means training, it means upskilling of your current workforce, a whole range of issues. How do we ensure full participation by groups that aren't participating fully in the economy today? And again, that's not a partisan issue. So it's an issue where we think that we can work with all the political parties to make some progress. The other, and it's very timely these days, is regulatory reform. And we want to very much focus on that. I've had a chance, going out of the meeting that I had with my colleagues, to meet with ministers responsible, including the Minister of Finance, the President of the Treasury Board, and others, to talk about how do we fix a regulatory system that is sclerotic, slow, costly, and in many ways broken. We saw with the tech decision recently the problem with the regulatory system that had become highly politicized. We need to take the politics out and have the system much more based on fact and on science, and ensure that when a regulator makes a decision, that it just doesn't then get thrown into the political sphere, that the politicians set the policy in advance and the regulator makes a decision based on the policy and based on the law. And then we can move ahead. If you get a yes, you can move ahead instead of spending $1 billion and finding the process simply grinding to a halt. And we can also build into the system in other areas. For example, we've recommended putting in to the mandates of regulatory agencies a statement requiring them to look at the economic consequences of their decisions and not just the narrow portfolio concerns. This is something the British have been doing for years, and if we can do it in Canada, it will result in a much more balanced approach being taken to regulation, and with departments at least taking on board what the impacts are of what they're doing. This is going to be a really timely meeting that we're going to be having. First, we're going to be talking about the Chamber itself. How can we improve our system of governance, particularly as it relates to the role of the board? How can we make it more fulfilling and worthwhile for directors and ensure that they can have a greater impact on the direction which the Chamber is going? So we'll have an expert coming in from the Institute of Governance to help facilitate that discussion, and I'm expecting it'll be a fascinating discussion for all of us. Second, and it's very timely, we'll be talking about the resource sector, particularly in Alberta. Following the tech announcement, this is going to be particularly timely, and it'll be a chance for us to look at what is being done, particularly in Alberta, to balance the need for development in the resources sector with the issue of climate and the environment more generally. And I think one of the things that's going to surprise a number of directors is see the commitment among Alberta businesses to strong, effective environmental policies. They are leaders in Canada in terms of advancing the environmental cause. But it's a story that deserves to be told and to be heard, and it's something that is very important. We'll be talking as well about infrastructure, both physical and digital, and that again is very timely. That's one of the issues that we've identified as being an area where we can make progress with the current government, and it's also very urgent. There are key issues with regard to the digital economy that every day that goes by become more pressing, so they will be absolutely key. And then we'll be having in other speakers who will be fascinating. What we try to do when we travel around is to give people a better sense of the communities in which we're meeting. So we've invited the Alberta Minister of Finance to join us and to talk about the economy. The Chamber of Commerce from Calgary as well, and others, and they'll be coming to talk to us about what does this mean in Alberta, where are we going, and how can the Canadian Chamber play a role in assisting. Since our December board meeting, perhaps the issue obviously that concerned our members more than any other has been the issue of the blockades across the country. And we've been hearing from members from one coast to another about the impact. It's not just the railroads, but all of their customers, everybody from restaurants to the tourism sector to farmers to fertilizer, the whole range. The impact has been enormous, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps billions of dollars of impact. And so our members and the whole of the business community look to the Canadian Chamber to provide leadership. One of the great advantages the Canadian Chamber has is our power to convene. We have around 100 sectoral associations that belong to the Canadian Chamber, and that's a very good base for us to work from, and some 450 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across the country. So in conjunction with our other partners, the Business Council, CCAB, CME, and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Canadian Chamber convened a meeting of associations on very short notice to come together, to put together a letter to government, to impress on government the need to deal with effectively and generously with Indigenous reconciliation issues, but to ensure that we got the system up and running again before more damage was done to businesses and ordinary Canadians. Ultimately, some 50 associations signed on to that letter. After the blockades were being lifted, we again met to talk about next steps and how we could work together. And this was very helpful to us in terms of looking for ways in which we can engage the government and impress upon the government that they need, as we come up to the budget, to focus not simply on environmental issues, but on the economy and what we can do to ensure that it's functioning for everybody. The chamber network as well was critical. We had additional conference calls with the provincial and territorial presidents to look at how we can make common cause there, and also held two calls with the whole of the chamber network. We encouraged individual chambers to go out in their communities over the course of the weekend while the blockades were still on, to call up their members of parliament, their MPPs, to talk to their mayors, and to make it clear to people that this was having impacts in local communities. And I believe that this sort of face-to-face, personal, local contact with government has an influence that goes way beyond anything that any of the rest of us could do without. So the convening power of the chamber and our willingness to lead on issues that are critical is what adds value to our members in so many ways. The tragedy of the blockades is that what it did was it so very often when you looked in the media, it portrayed businesses being on one side and Indigenous communities as being on another. And that simply wasn't the case. The concern certainly that I had as the issue continued to grow was that we were seeing the legitimate concerns that Indigenous communities had being hijacked by third-party groups for their own purposes, and in many cases destroying the support that's needed for genuine reconciliation. The Canadian business community, and certainly the Canadian Chamber, have an obligation to move ahead on Indigenous reconciliation and demonstrate good faith consistently. And our determination coming out of the situation is not to pull back, but to continue moving ahead, looking for ways to build trust, to build bridges of reconciliation, to ensure that when development takes place, it isn't development that's done to communities, but the development that is done with communities and with them as partners. And the Canadian Chamber as a national institution has a key role to play on behalf of business in helping to lead that and helping to guide the way. We're looking forward to seeing everybody in Calgary. You should have your board documents in your inbox by March 18th. And then I want to remind you as well that on March 24th, we'll be having an executive dinner in Calgary. It's not part of the board meeting as such, but we hope you'll be able to participate in that. It's an opportunity for you to have a chance to meet with members of the business community from the Calgary area. And I think it should be a really interesting evening as well. So I hope everybody's all ready to go. We've got a great agenda lined up. It couldn't be more topical than it is right now, and we're looking forward to seeing you in Calgary.